So for my final presentation, I'll be talking and reflecting on my first assignment of the book case study. I focused on the Supreme Court case of Johnson versus Avery. Now for this case, it revolved around the First and Eighth Amendment, but specifically talking about an inmate's right to assist other inmates in legal counsel in their attempts for appeals or their attempts for the habeas corpus torts and reliefs. So it's interesting because it never crossed my mind that a corrections officer would go through such lengths as to deprive an inmate from the chance to maybe get freedom if he's wrongfully convicted, or help himself in the long run by getting a sentence reduced or something along those lines. Now, what these corrections officers are doing, or were doing at the time, were they were taking away his law books, they were taking away his typewriter, they took him into solitary confinement, and not only did they deprive himself, that inmate, of his right to legal aid by hindering his own progression, they also hindered the progression of other inmates because they were depending on that inmate to help them out with their appeals. So it just doesn't make sense to me why they would do that. Sure, it was a long time ago, and throughout time, the Supreme Court cases and the amendments and the statutory laws have helped greatly with understanding that corrections officers can't act as God, that prisoners do have rights, constitutional rights. Even though they are in prison and they are convicted felons, they still are afforded rights, and that is one of them. So that is just something that has evolved over time. So the big essential questions or big ideas of the course, it's prisoners' rights, straight up and down. The prisoner has a right, their First Amendment rights, which states that they reserve the right to petition courts for a redress of grievances. So by taking away the inmate's law materials and typewriter, the corrections officers have restricted them from their First Amendment rights, and in doing so, they've hindered the inmate's rights to petition the courts. So that's right there. So we're talking about the essential questions or big ideas of rights, prisoners' rights. We're also talking about their Eighth Amendment, which is prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. So with that, you're protecting inmates from improper use of force, unsanitary prison conditions, as well as overpopulated prisons. So prisons have also retained their other constitutional rights, such as due process and the right to use the parole system. So by depriving this inmate from legal assistance and legal aid, you have violated their First and Eighth Amendment rights. So there's not a leg to stand on for these for this prison or these corrections officers to justify their actions. So we have these constitutional laws. They protect prisoners as long as the prisoner's confinement does not violate their due process clause, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Equal Protection Clause, and cruel and unusual punishment laws, and the rights to legal aid. So all those rights have to be considered by correctional officers and institutions, sometimes in a split second. So it's very easy for a corrections officer to, if they're uneducated or not trained properly, to have bad judgment in a situation like this and snap to maybe a personal bias or a decision which puts themselves in a lawsuit or something of that nature. So it's important for corrections officers to understand a court process, because once they know that these inmates have these rights, they're going to be like, okay, I'm going to fix that behavior. Not only am I going to fix that behavior, but I'm going to make sure everyone I'm working with knows that behavior is not going to fly. It's depriving someone from their constitutional rights, and that's a big deal. So officers need to know that they need to allow inmates the appropriate time, appropriate setting, and appropriate resources for inmates to prepare for their legal proceedings. So their rights have evolved since then, because the U.S. court cases keep being brought up by inmates who believe their constitutional rights have been violated during their incarceration. And the U.S. Supreme Court will continue to evolve, and as multiple cases get thrown their way, this is their evolution of inmates' rights doesn't just hinge on whether or not they can have legal aid. All these statutory laws help and affect this sole subject right here. There's other things that can help a prisoner with their legal aid just by all these different statutory laws. It puts it in the heads of the prison facilities, it puts it in the heads of the correctional officers that they really need to abide by all of these constitutional rights. And with that being said, it affects prison policy by restricting prison population to prevent overcrowding, to curtail the amount of force an officer can use. It protects an inmates from discrimination. Maybe discrimination was used in this case as justified means of depriving the rights to legal aid. You never know. It was in the 1940s, I believe. Unlawful confinement conditions, putting that inmate in solitary confinement was probably unlawful. Disabling them from legal aid, that's one we're hitting on. And many other things regarding an inmate's constitutional rights available to them while incarcerated. So, in essence, a corrections officer needs to be in the loop with the current standards given to them by the ACA. They need to be concurrent on their statutory laws to make sure that those statutory laws fall within the ACA standards that are promoted to them. They need to make sure their coworkers and their management are all on the same page so that this doesn't happen again. That's a big takeaway from the course. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.